Well, good morning. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, KET. I can't say enough about the partnership that we have with KET and all that they mean to us at KDE, and especially to our digital learning coaches and the growth that we've experienced this past year because of the assistance and support that KET has provided. So, thank you, and thank you for providing the multimedia days once again. And like she said, we're excited that we can continue to do this virtually. But I am such a people person, and I cannot wait to get back and actually see people like 3D people, not 2D. So excited for that coming up soon, I'm hoping. So, before I get started talking about technology standards, I do want to ask you to do something. If you could look in the participants list, or if you see your name, you're going to see three little dots beside your name. Click on those three dots and then click on where it says rename. I would love for you to have your first name and last name, and then after your name, whether it's in parentheses or a hyphen, however you want to do it, put your district or what organization you're with. That just helps us as we're answering questions. If I need to follow up afterwards if you've had a question. I see you guys are doing it. That's so helpful. And I think it's good for you too, because you see a first name, but you're like, hey, is that the person? Is that the same one I know? So having your first name and last name and then your district or what organization you're with certainly helps a lot of us as we're connecting and collaborating. I'm going to give you just a second to do that while I start to pull up my screen. All right. So in the chat, I dropped two URLs or addresses that you'll definitely want to bookmark. And so the very first one, of course, is the KY Standards website, which many of you are probably very familiar with. If not, I would recommend you get familiar with it. But it will take you to the site where all the standards are located for Kentucky. And we actually have two sets of standards that sometimes people get a little confused on. It said it won't let you change your name, Randy. Okay, that's all right. We'll let you slide this time. But right here on this site, you're going to see two sets of standards that sometimes folks get confused about. When we're talking technology standards, a lot of us interchange the words computer and technology, and that makes sense. However, for today's session, and when we're talking about the technology standards, we want to make sure that we're referring to the correct one. So you'll see here on my screen that we have the Kentucky Academic Standards for Computer Science, and those are fantastic, but those are not the ones we're talking about today. You'll see that we also have the ones right here that say Kentucky Academic Standards for Technology, and those are the ones that we're talking about. I'll explain a little bit more of the difference between the two as we proceed, but just as a real quick reminder that the computer science standards, while they're not a required standard per se with everyone, they are a set of standards that if you do have computer science in your building or in your district, those are the standards that those teachers would use. However, the ones that we're going to spend the most time on are those Kentucky Academic Standards for Technology, and those are a requirement for all people in all grade levels. And so let's just jump straight into that document. So if you've not accessed it, I would highly recommend that you access it. And let me go back over here to the chat. It looks like we might have, awesome. Thank you, Amy, for dropping those in. I know some people, after they've joined, they may not see that in the chat, so thank you. But over here, we have the actual technology standards document. And I just want to start out by saying that the people who worked on this document were brilliant. They did such a phenomenal job. They actually started in 2019 writing these standards with the anticipation that they would roll out in 2020. But we know what happened last year. And so we kind of put the pause on those, and rightfully so, because that might have been too much to handle a new set of standards rolling out at the same time with the pandemic. So trying to be very mindful of what was going on. Decided to roll these out this upcoming year. So you'll see in the document as you scroll through that the table of contents, these are all hyperlinked, which means if I want to go to straight to a particular page, I can click on it. So let's look at this legal basis, for example. Um, the technology standards are, as you will see on that page, a high school graduation requirement. And so the key word there, of course, is requirement. And there is a regulation written around those. So those are not an optional. Like I said, the computer science were um, not optional for the people who teach computer science, but they're optional for those who don't teach computer science. But these technology standards are a graduation requirement, kindergarten through grade 12. So there's a regulation. I'm not going to bore you with reading that regulation, but if in your spare time you would like to read that, it is found on pages 5 and 6 of the standards documentation. But just know that those will go into full implementation in a couple of weeks. I also want to point out on the table of contents that while I said the writers did a phenomenal job writing these, you will quickly see how easy these are to implement. The writing team was very intentional on making sure these were easily embedded in all content areas in all grade levels, kindergarten through 12. And you'll keep hearing me say that kindergarten through 12, all content areas. And so what they did was they literally laid down all those other sets of standards that we saw back on the KentuckyStandards.org site. They laid down all of those other standards as they wrote these standards. And our question that we would have for everyone as they were writing them is like, is this indicator easily embedded in kindergarten? Is it easily embedded in a fifth grade classroom, in the seventh grade social studies classroom, in a high school chemistry classroom? And if the answer was no, then we rewrote them because we wanted it to be something that was easily embedded. And we didn't feel like it was something on top of the work that we were already doing. Sorry, I was looking at the chat. I thought I saw something pop up. So we wanted to make sure that those were easily embedded. Now, the other question that I normally get right here, and that's why I looked at the chat to see if this popped up, but the other question that we get a lot of times around that idea of them being a requirement and a graduation requirement is, well, what about the test? So I am thrilled to tell you there is not a test for the technology standards, and there shouldn't be a test. We're not testing on can the students mute their mic or turn their cameras off and on? Can they, type so many words per minute? That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the effective use of the technology for the other content areas. And so we're just using the technology as a tool to get to and through those other sets of standards. And I'll get to more of that here in just a little bit. But wanted you to know up front, there's not a test because what is tested is, can they read? Can they write? The math, the science, the social studies, all those other things. That's what should be tested and not can they use the mic, right? Or can they use their device correctly. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. The next thing that I wanted to point out with the graduation requirement, and it is back on pages 5 and 6, when we're talking about that Kentucky regulation and minimum graduation requirements, is that it is a piece of graduation. So there is a document, and especially if you all are high school people, and if you're not, that's okay because you're working towards getting your students to high school. But if you are a high school person, then this document probably looks a little familiar, and it's our minimum graduation requirements for our students in Kentucky. And if you look closely at the other graduation requirements, there's a bullet here that says demonstrates competency in technology. That phrase is so important because it connects right back to our regulation that's written around these standards. So there is that connection. It is a part of your graduation requirements, and the technology standards are required kindergarten through grade 12. So let me pause for just a second and see if there are any questions yet around that part. Awesome. Looks like we're doing good. So you guys are hanging with me. Perfect. All right, so let me move on to, I want to show you another page on the document that I think is pretty important to you, and that's the identifier. Like, how do we identify the standards that we're looking at? So these are very similar to any other standard that you use in your school. We first look at the grade band, so we would identify those with a P, an I, an M, or an H. We look at the concept and understand that we followed our ISTE standards, which are the international standards for technology. So we followed those and we have the exact same 7 concepts. But right here in this spot is the one area that I want to point out to you. And I'm super excited about this. If there is a 1 in this standard location, then understand that that is talking about a skill that is to be taught. More to come on that. But if there is a 2 in that location, then it is an application of a skill that was taught. So a 1 is a skill and a 2 is an application of the skill. And then, of course, we start breaking those down into a learning priority and then the actual indicators of what it is our students will be doing, right? All right, let me go back up here to the top to my interactive table of contents. And the next piece that I want to point out to you is this right here, that connection to graduation. And obviously, this is the piece that a lot of your, especially your administrators, will want to know. Like, how do I connect it to graduation? How do I, if these are a requirement, how do I focus on that as a graduation requirement? So here we go. This is where you want to point your folks to. And it's Appendix A. So those first few bullets are pretty much a summary of that regulation, that KAR 3:305. But some of the key points that it's defining those competencies and minimum graduation requirements. There's a difference between computer science standards and technology standards. But I love, love, love this image right here because to me, it paints a really good picture of what I've been saying as far as why we're not testing and this growth and this timeline, if you will, of technology in Kentucky. So back in the 90s, we were just learning how to use technology. If you were a student of or a teacher of back in the 90s, we were learning how to use the technology. Like, what is this thing called a mouse? What is this thing called a keyboard and a tower and a monitor and all those things? So we were just learning how to use it. And then if we move forward into the early 2000s, we were using technology to learn. And that's when, a lot of times we were talking about keyboarding or we were talking about some of those other things of after we learned how to use the technology, then we started using it to learn. But today, it's that transformative learning with technology. So again, we're looking at how do I just use this tool that I have given to me to teach reading and writing and math and science and social studies and the arts and everything else. So how do I use that technology to learn and not so much about the nuts and bolts of the device itself? So that's in Appendix A, but you'll also see in Appendix A that we have given some guidance. Like, how do I make sure that we are using this and implementing it correctly? So right here you have a couple of ideas. So it might be through performance-based It might be through a program like STLP, Student Technology Leadership Program. It might be through the use of internships or pathways, um, all sorts of different ways that you can implement the technology standards and make sure that those are being implemented with fidelity. And so pointing your people back to Appendix A, I think will definitely help as you're moving forward with some of this. All right, so let's get to the piece that most people want to see, and that is the progression chart. And I know that that is teensy tiny little font, but I'm going to leave it teensy tiny for just a minute because I want to point out something. And the color coding of these standards was so important as we were writing these, and now as they're rolling out. As I mentioned earlier on that indicator, remember the spot where there was a one or a two, and a one represented a skill to be taught, and a two was the application of the skill? We've got those color coded. And so whenever I look at the first concept of empowered learner, I see two different shades of green. And so the lighter shade has a one in that standards location. So those are all the skills to be taught. And then of course we have our columns, the K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. So we have our grade bands. And then when you see the darker shade of green, that's an application of some of those skills from up above. Now, if you see down here at the bottom, there are a couple of boxes that are blank. And that just simply means that the writing team thought that that particular um, uh, standard was not applicable for those grade levels. So maybe that one just, they needed to grow and they needed to learn some of the other skills before high school so that in high school they could implement it. But then as I scroll down, I'm going to start seeing the same thing with digital citizenship. I see a light yellow and a darker yellow. So a skill and the application, and all the way through knowledge constructor, skills and application, all the way down. So that's super important because I know, especially with educators, color coding and identifying things just makes it so much easier, so much more user friendly, and I can navigate to what it is I'm looking for, right? So let me just zoom in though on one of these. Let me go back up here to empowered learner. And so if I zoom in on that first one, I want you to see how simple this is to actually embed within your curriculum. So that very first one, and we're talking kindergarten through grade 2, so our littles, it says set personal learning goals and use digital tools to achieve these goals with guidance and support. That little phrase was super important. Our writing team added that with, especially for our littles, because they still do need guidance and support, right? So with that guidance and support, for example, increasing reading fluency by recording and reflecting upon student reading. Y'all, I taught kindergarten for a year. Bless those people's souls. But I do remember our kindergartners, we map tested. And so our kindergartners would take a graph, and after they would take their map test, we would graph their score and we would help them to color in the bar to see where they were, right? Then after, and then set a goal. And then after their next round of testing, they would look to see in the color in the bar to see where it was that they had grown, see how much they had grown over time. So when we think about that, can't we take that same concept and move it to using technology to do something? I've seen across the state a lot of our kindergartners use like a Google Sheet, and they color in the cells to represent what their score is. So it's just moving some of that to a digital platform. So, and this again is a skill. So you're teaching them how to use that platform or that resource to map or to record their reading fluency. Can they do that? Absolutely, they can. So, am I going to test them on the ability to fill in the cells on a spreadsheet? No. So that's why there's not a test for this. What we're testing is their reading fluency. So then that's why, again, there's not a test for this, but it is a part of a requirement because that is a really valuable skill for our students to have. And then as you look through some of these others, after they've learned that skill of using a sheet or however or wherever you decide to do that, you can start to see that they take that to the next level. And now they start applying some of those skills that they would have learned up here. So it's empowering those students to own their learning, right? So all of that is inside that progression chart. And so I would highly recommend taking some time then to peruse that document and break it apart for your grade band if that's what you need to do. But obviously, sharing this out with your folks is extremely, extremely important. And so that brings me to my most exciting piece of this presentation. And that is the idea that our digital learning coaches across the state have worked with this set of standards for the past year as we did not implement those last fall. They've had an opportunity to look at them to see how easily these could be embedded within our curriculum. And they were super excited that they could. So as they were looking at this progression chart right here, they started curating some resources. We all know that teachers spend anywhere from 7 to 12 hours a week looking for resources for the lessons that they're going to teach, looking for things that are going to assist their students. That's a lot of time. That's like another day, day and a half of their time. And we know when they do that after hours and on the weekends, right? And so, one of the things leading this writing team, one of the things that we wanted to do was remove that from their plate. If we were truly going to say these are so easily embedded within your curriculum, we wanted to go ahead and give you that next piece, and that's those resources. So we started thinking about how we could pull these resources together to give you um, sort of like the best of the best. And that's one of the other pieces that I asked them, please don't give me like a blue million resources around this particular standard, because that's really not any more helpful than just like a Google search, right? So go ahead and just give me like the top. What are your top resources? So that's what we started doing. We started pulling all of those together so that teachers were not going to have to spend those extra 7 to 12 hours on technology standards finding resources to implement these. And as we were doing that, we also started finding some really good student examples. And I know many of you saw those on social media this past year, especially when people were tweeting and putting out on their social media accounts all the great things that their students were making and creating. Like, we didn't see them filling in a worksheet, did we? We saw them outside doing scavenger hunts. We saw them creating projects with sidewalk chalk. We saw them doing all sorts of things. And so we want to make sure that we're championing our students. And as an educator myself, a lot of times when I look at a set of standards, I think I know what it means, but I'm not sure that's what the writer intended it to be. So if you could just give me an example, that would really help to help me refine what it is I'm going to ask my students to do. So we started pulling those together too. So we started pulling together those teacher resources and student examples. And I know I'm building up for this. So where is this treasure of resources and student examples, right? Well, back in the chat, I dropped earlier, and I think Amy dropped it too. Back in the chat, I dropped in that bit.ly/Kentucky DLC, right? And so I'm going to go to that website really quickly. So this is our DLC website. If you've never been here, I would highly recommend you bookmark this because what you're getting ready to see is going to become your best friend as you start implementing these resources. So, this is the website that our digital learning coaches across the state use as their resource. And this became the best place that we could come up with in order to give you that treasure trove of teacher resources and student examples. So we've tried to make it really easy to get to. So technology standards, I bet that's where we go. So when I get to the technology standards website or page, when I scroll down here, you're going to see that it tells me I can go back to that kystandards.org site to get that document if I would like to, or I can get the direct link to the standards document here. And that is that PDF that I just scrolled through a second ago. My good friend James Allen and one of my teammates, and many of you know him, created this little GIF for me that if you're not sure how to navigate a dashboard that I'm getting ready to open, it's a real quick little GIF that shows you where to click and all that kind of good stuff. But right below it is the actual link to the dashboard. So let me just jump over here to it and show you what it looks like. And so here we are. This is it. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the filters. And so the filters include the concepts. So those 7 concepts for our technology standards. And then our content areas that we teach, and then the grade bands. Just for easy convenience, that after you sometimes navigate to something, you forget how to get back to it. Here's another PDF of the standards document if you would like it. But currently, I don't have anything filtered. I've got all of them wide open. I'm going to leave them open for just a second and show you what is on this site. First of all, over here on the right-hand side are my teacher resources. It's going to tell me, first of all, what concept I'm looking at, what the resource is. And then it gives a brief description. This is a description that some of the DLCs wrote. So it should be in a really user-friendly understanding and a description of what that site is. And then it's going to tell me the grade bands that site or that resource would fit more closely with. After that, I have what the type is. So is it a website? Maybe it's a document or a video or something else. Is there a cost associated? Oh my goodness, especially moving forward. Isn't that important? Because, man, this past year, so many vendors gave us things for free just to get us through the pandemic. But you know what they're doing now? They're starting to charge us, right? So watch out for that. So we've included, is it a cost? Is there a cost associated? Is it free? Is it a freemium? That means it's free up to a point, and then if you want all the features, you have to buy it, right? So whatever it is, if I look at those resources and I like it, or it sounds like I might like it, I click on this little icon, this little blue arrow, and it's going to pop me out to that particular site or that resource. So it's ready, set, go, and it takes me to it. So as I scroll down through these resources, though, what I want you to see is that they're color coded. What are they color coded to? The progression chart. And so now, whether a teacher is out there on that progression chart over here, let me get back here to it. If I'm on the progression chart here and I'm looking for something green, I need to go over here and make sure I'm in the green. And the green represents empowered learner, right? So again, those are all color coded, super, super important. And it just makes me realize I'm in the right spot for what I'm looking for. So all of those resources are here. If I scroll down a bit, these things down here, these little squares are called cards on a dashboard. And the cards are the student examples. And once again, look at them. They're color coded to those concepts on our standards. And so as I look at these, if I'm looking at empowered learner, I see my grade band and I see a type, like, is this student example? Is it a website? Is it a document? What is this thing? And so I have all of these that I could go through, or I can come back up here to my filters and run a few filters to help me navigate to the one that I want, right? So let's just do that. Let me do that really quick. And then I'm going to let you play on it for a minute. Let's say that I'm looking, I'm trying to meet the knowledge constructor concept. So I'm going to click on only. And you can see it starts doing its thing. So now everything else is gone. And if I look over at the teacher resources now, as I scroll through that, I only see that sort of like blue. Those are the teacher resources that the coaches have curated for you. So now I have my teacher resources. But what about those student examples? Well, let me go down to them. Down here below, everything went blank except for knowledge constructor, because that's what I ran the filter on. I could run another filter on grade band and narrow it down to a particular grade band that I'm looking for. And if I wanted to do that, I would come back up here and I would choose the grade band. That would also run the filter on the teacher resource and on the student examples. But let me just show you a couple of examples and show you why I think this is super, super helpful. If I clicked it, and I've already pulled some up so you didn't have to watch my computer spin while I've navigated to them. So here's one for the knowledge constructor. And many of you may think, oh my goodness, our students did that. We made a digital notebook last year. And if you did, guess what? You're already meeting the standards. And I really think that you're going to see that you have, especially because of the situation we were in last year. And if you didn't, as you start looking through this slide deck, you may think, oh my goodness, that's my students could absolutely do that. And so if you look at this and you think, oh, man, that's super cool. I would love to have that slide deck. Guess what? You can have it. And all you have to do is go to File and make a copy. And you can absolutely have that slide deck. So now, guess what we just did? We took away the 7 to 12 hours that we've given you resources, up at the top. So all sorts of resources that you can use to teach. And we've given you a template that you can take back and easily implement within your classroom. And guess what? Now you're meeting the standards. And I bet a lot of your people have already done that. Here's another example that was on that dashboard. And this is a tweet. So you're going to see some that were sent out, but I bet you can think of some people who've done stuff like this. Our fifth graders participated in digital citizenship by creating Flipgrids. I bet your people used Flipgrid last year. And comic strips teaching about digital citizenship. I love the fact that the students were creating the comic strips to teach about digital citizenship. And you all know that your students can do that. They absolutely can. So guess what? Not only are you meeting that knowledge constructor, but look, you're meeting some of the digital citizenship standards as well, simultaneously. And I'm not stopping to teach knowledge constructor and digital citizenship. I'm doing it embedded within my other curriculum, right? Another one, and we talked about being able to meet those requirements through things like STLP. And so here's a project, an STLP project. And as you watch that video, you can hear that student verbalize how he and she, there's a group of them, how they met those standards within this one project. And so it's so easy then to take those standards and embed them. I mentioned a minute ago Flipgrid. And I want to go back to that idea. Oh, which by the way, if I get back to my dashboard and I want to search for something else and I'm like, how do I make that go away and those others come back? Go up here to the word reset and click on reset, and it resets that entire dashboard. And now you can run another filter. Okay. And if you forget how to do that, back on the DLC website, that's what this little GIF does. It explains how to click on filters and how to pull them all back, right? But I want to go back to, I mentioned Flipgrid just a second ago. And I've mentioned the fact that many of you are already meeting these standards. And you are. Because if I think about some of the things that I saw on social media this past year, many of you tweeted out or you posted somewhere on social media that you pulled in an author or you pulled in a business person into your Google Meet or your Teams call or your Zoom call, whatever platform you were using. You pulled that person in. Guess what? You were communicating, right, with somebody outside your classroom. So now you've got this creative communicator. Guess what? You're also collaborating with somebody outside of the classroom. So now you're starting to meet some of the global collaborator standards. After that person came into the classroom and spoke to your students, you may have had them, or the teacher may have had them respond in the learning management system chat, or they may have created a Flipgrid. Whatever that case may be, now they are creating. You're also empowering their learning process. Y'all, in that one lesson, there are so many of these technology standards that you would have met. And that's why I say that these technology standards, while sometimes we might think, oh my goodness, it's one more thing, I don't want you to view it as that. I want you to view this as this is that piece that helps me not revert back to some of our old ways. How do I ensure that my teachers are moving forward with all the greatness that they did pre-pandemic and all the skills that they learned during the pandemic? How do I blend those two things to make sure we're moving forward with this? And that technology standards document will do that. And then if they're still a little uncomfortable after they see the document, point them to this dashboard and say, look, you don't even have to go look for it. We've got it all pulled together for you right here. And then give them some of those ideas, champion some of that work that they've already done, the greatness that they've already, all the skills that they've learned, all the great things that they taught this past year, the marvelous things their students created, and show them how all of that is a piece of this actual standards, the technology standards document and that graduation requirement, because we do want to make sure that when our students graduate, that they're competitive, that they're able to compete with students from around the globe. And we know how small our globe has gotten during the pandemic. We want to make sure that our students have that advantage provided to them. And many opportunities are provided to them through the use of technology, right? So I'm going to let me jump over here to this. And I want to leave you with that little bit of information. Those are the two resources that I've shared with you today. The standards website, right? And then the DLC website as well. That website, the DLC website, is where they would go to access that dashboard. That's not going to be found on that Kentucky Standards site. That is only found linked on our DLC website. So you'll definitely want to point people to that in order to give them the access to those resources. And I just have to say that the kudos go to our digital learning coaches. I have that opportunity and the great honor of working with the digital learning coaches across the state. And some of you are a DLC. I'm looking at the list of folks that's out there. And so they're the ones who did all this legwork. I just got to help pull it together. But you'll definitely want to check out their site. They've got some other great stuff on it as well.